Hi, I'm Todd Peterson with One Identity, and today we're going to talk about Active Directory-centered identity and access management. So let's turn to the whiteboard. First off, let's talk about AD and Azure AD. They're everywhere. So according to Microsoft, 95% of the Fortune 1000 has Active Directory in their environment, and 85% has Azure Active Directory. And that's growing very quickly. So, bottom line is you have Active Directory or Azure Active Directory in your environment. And if you don't have to watch this video, but you probably do. So, Active Directory and Azure Active Directory are everywhere. They're also pretty much necessary for most people's operations. If you want to use Exchange, if you want to use Office 365, if you want to use Excel, if you want to use SharePoint, you can't do any of that without an account in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, depending on which one you've got. Also, for many, many organizations, it's the authoritative identity for people. When you ask, which directory or which account is the most important within your organization, a lot of people will say it's the Active Directory account. That's how we decide who somebody is and what they're allowed to do. And it's really key in people's digital transformations. Most of the digital transformations going on are moving to Azure or moving to Office 365, and you can't do that without the Azure Active Directory being involved, migrating from your on-prem to Azure or adding Azure to everything. So this hybrid AD environment is super important to pretty much everybody out there. And identity and access management is super important to operating within any environment, but particularly in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So the things that have to happen for you to access what you need within this environment are three things. First is request. Somebody has to ask for you to be given access to what you need to do your job, or for someone else to be given the access. And then fulfillment, often called provisioning. Somebody has to go in and set up your account in Active Directory, in Exchange, in Azure Active Directory, etc. And then certification. Somebody, usually the boss, has to go in on a periodic basis and say, yes, I certify or I attest that the access this employee has in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory or whatever is what I say it is and that it's appropriate. So let's walk through a typical workflow of how this happens usually within an Active Directory environment. We've got a new employee here. This employee needs access to Active Directory so they can get into Exchange. So somebody is going to make a request and say, let's put this person in Active Directory. And then somebody in IT usually is going to fulfill that request or provision that request. But that's only going to put them in Active Directory and in the correct groups. To put them in Exchange, you're going to have to do another request. You have to make another action. Maybe another person in IT goes in and does that. So you've got this stuff going on across everything that needs to be touched. Also, periodically, somebody's going to have to go in and certify that access. So the boss is going to go in and say, yeah, I approve that this person's access is actually what it says it is, and that's all fine and good. So that's pretty convoluted for the Active Directory environment. But then you have to repeat it for Azure Active Directory: request, fulfillment, certification. That extends to Office 365, request, fulfillment, certification. Then you have a whole bunch of non-Windows systems with the same thing going on. Request, fulfillment, certification for, say, Salesforce. Request, fulfillment, certification for Box or for Concur or for Workday or whatever. And then if you have legacy systems like Unix or Linux, again, request, fulfillment, certification. So you've got this stuff happening over and over again. It's happening inconsistently. It's happening with a lot of different people. So the consequences of this is things take a lot of time. If you can't tell, this is a clock. So things take a lot of time. Things are expensive. You're repeating effort. And the bottom line is you're going to end up with a lot of risk because these things are not necessarily done correctly. They're done inconsistently. There's room for human error. There's just all kinds of things that can go wrong in this environment. So basing your identity and access management on Active Directory can overcome a lot of these things if you do it in the right way. So let's clean the board off and talk about what those ways are. So the first would be to automate that provisioning process. That thing that you have to do where an IT guy goes in and does this in AD, and then another guy goes in and does this in Exchange, another guy goes in and does this in Azure Active Directory and Office 365. What if you could automate all of that, put it in a single workflow so the new employees added to the HR database, and then that tells something to go out and provision all that stuff accurately. So that can be done through a one identity solution called Active Roles. Bottom line is when the person's added to the HR database, the provisioning action happens across the AD Exchange, Azure AD, Office 365. That entire environment happens automatically. Okay? You can then extend that provisioning, that AD-based stuff, to other systems, for example, Unix and Linux, through a solution called Authentication Services. So now when you provision somebody in AD, you're also provisioning them in Unix and Linux. So you've automated the provisioning and you've extended the scope across more things. But there's even more ways you can expand that. Through some newer technologies, you're now able to include a lot of cloud applications into this environment as well. That's done through a thing called Starling Connect. It's a SaaS-delivered collection of connectors. It's about 45 right now, and it's growing forever. It's available right now, that allows you to extend the active roles provisioning capabilities to these cloud applications, just like you did for the Unix and Linux through Authentication Services. So that right there is going to cause you a lot of efficiency benefits. You now are able to do things much more quickly, way more consistently, because it doesn't happen, in a haphazard manner. You don't have a lot of people involved, and you pretty much give someone immediate access and appropriate access when they need it. So that's great. Provisioning's taken care of, but what about access request? You can now add cloud-delivered access request on top of that. That's through a thing called Starling Access Request. It's a SaaS solution that sits on top of active roles and allows you to say, I need to request access to this thing. All the approvals are built in, it will go through, and then it will kick off the automatic provisioning across this entire environment that we talked about. Also, you can now add the access certification as well through a thing called Starling Access Certification. That allows you to, once again, on top of what you're doing with active roles, you can do the access request, but now the line of business manager can go in and do the certification on all that access in AD, Azure AD, Office 365, Exchange, the Unix and Linux systems, all these cloud applications that you've connected through these other things. That will allow you to do all of that in a single unified approach. So you've got your provisioning, you've got your access request, and you've got your access certification across not only the hybrid AD environment, but this expanded to Unix and Linux and to a lot of other cloud applications. So the bottom line is what you're getting out of this is efficiency and consistency, as I mentioned, but you're also getting economy. Things are costing less. Things are more unified, so you don't do them over and over again. It doesn't waste time. You've got better security because of consistency. Now you have a single set of policy and a single set of workflows that grants people this access. And it makes compliance much easier. Because you have everything all set up correctly from the start, it's much easier to do attestation and say, yeah, I know that the access is what it should be, not that it's, I hope it's right because I haven't seen that it's wrong. So the bottom line is if you can base your identity and access management stuff on Active Directory, expand it as far as you can, and then add these governance capabilities on top of it, you can really solve a lot of problems. Now you can do that with One Identity. One Identity offers all these products that we just talked about. If you want to learn more, go to oneidentity.com/product/active roles, and we can then link you to all these other options that will allow you to get way further down that identity and access management road than you could previously. So check us out at oneidentity.com/products/active roles. Thanks.